But first, we have much bigger news that came out right at closing time on Friday, as these things tend to do, because the NRA jury has come in. And juries, I think, are sort of somewhat notorious for not wanting to go through the weekend if they don't have to. And so we got a verdict right at closing time on Friday in the NRA case. To talk about that a little bit, we're going to start off the show with contributing writer Jake Fogleman. How are you doing today, Jake?
Good. Yeah, like you said, kind of big news happening right at the tail end of the day here, right before the weekend. Excited to dive into it.
Yeah, absolutely. And so the big news is that the National Rifle Association was found to have not safeguarded their charitable assets by this jury in New York. And at this point, former CEO Wayne LaPierre, longtime head and face of the organization, was found to have harmed the NRA and its members by diverting $5.4 million worth of charity funds towards his own personal expenses. So those are kind of the big takeaways. We'll get into some of the other things that came out as well. It wasn't a total down the line verdict here on all charges against all defendants, but kind of the big top line tickets were firmly against the NRA.
Yeah, absolutely. Like you said, that's sort of the big news. What I think people that are more casually following this trial were watching closely was obviously what happens to the NRA as a whole and what happens to its longtime face, Wayne LaPierre. And as sort of your coverage of this trial tended to indicate, just based on the facts and the way the case played out in court, this seemed to be kind of the likely outcome that we all expected. Just the way the facts laid out, the way the testimony went, the way closing arguments went, it just seemed like this was going to be the likely outcome. And sure enough, we have a huge ruling against quite literally the largest gun rights organization in the country. Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's a very consequential one. There are a couple of things here or there that we'll discuss as far as the specifics of some of the rulings, especially against the other individual plaintiffs or defendants, besides LaPierre, that we'll get into. But the things that really matter for the future of the NRA, those all, I think, went basically against the organization and its current leadership, current and former leadership, to the point where there's still now a live possibility that Judge Joel Cohen, who is overseeing this case, will appoint a monitor, somebody who was going to be in charge of overseeing the NRA and how it functions, and could have a great deal of power to affect its internal operations, how it spends money, how it's organized, the bylaws, and who its leadership are, right? That's, I think, the really big takeaway from this verdict. These things have not been determined yet. That's another important point. The jury is doing the fact finding in this case. They aren't handing down an actual punishment or ruling, in the sense that they're not saying that there will be a court appointed monitor or that Wayne LaPierre will pay back this money. They're saying that the NRA didn't properly manage its funds and that it didn't have, for instance, a proper whistleblower policy, and that it allowed retaliation against at least 8 different whistleblowers in this case, including a lot of former board members and NRA employees, and that Wayne LaPierre's diversion of funds was, and these were largely associated with the private jet flights, that those were that they harmed the organization in a monetary way, and to $5.4 million worth of monetary harm is what the jury determined. It's not exactly clear how they came to that number specifically. I think he was accused by the AG of somewhere closer to $11 million. So they kind of cut that in half, it looks like. And then they also determined that he paid back $1 million. So he's more on the hook for, I think, about 4.3. Former treasurer Woody Phillips is also going on the hook for about $1 million, it looks like, as well. So, the former executives are going to potentially be ordered to pay money back, but that hasn't happened yet. That's where the judge
will come, and there'll be another phase of this trial, which will determine what the actual remedies are going to be. But they're probably going to line up pretty closely with what the jury has found, I would imagine.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And like you said, there's sort of the two components of what the political fallout of this will be. One is the to be determined damages that will be assigned to the group or its members, whether or not, obviously LaPierre has already stepped down from the NRA, but whether or not the other co-defendants will be barred from the organization, whether or not there's a monitor that will deal with, how the NRA operates going forward. And then two, just I think the political fallout of just having a corruption verdict go against your organization, that just reputationally, what does that do for gun owners and potential future members that maybe would have donated to the NRA and become NRA members that now say, well, it's an organization that was found by a jury to be a corrupt organization, or at least was corruptly run for a time. What does that do to the future of the largest gun rights organization in the country? So a lot up in the air right now.
I think that's a really valid point. What we do know a little bit about as far as at least what the jury has found cause for in terms of barring people from working with the NRA. And that is that the Wayne LaPierre, they found cause in the evidence to bar him from working with the NRA in the future. But even though they found John Frazier, who's the NRA's top lawyer, he's the general counsel, although he previously testified he was out of the loop on a lot of its major sort of legal decisions over the last several years, like whether to file bankruptcy, things like that, or Wayne LaPierre's salary negotiations, a lot of these sort of high level decision making. He wasn't really involved in that stuff, but they interestingly found him. They found that he lied or presented materially false information on government forms. I think it was related to the related party transactions, which they also will dive into that a little bit too. But they also found there wasn't cause to remove him from his position. So as far as I understand it, that means he can't be removed by the judge. I don't think so. He could be removed perhaps by the NRA after this. It'll be fascinating to see what happens to the organization, because, like you said, I think it's a huge PR nightmare for them. It's part of an ongoing one, though, right? Like this has been a PR nightmare for them for years now. It's been 5 years since these things, really closer to 6 years, because the first story was Wall Street Journal in 2018, but the first big blow up internally came in 2019, and they've lost millions of members. We're not even sure how many they have, right? Some board members say it's 3.8, where one board member says that mostly. Another board member, Buzz Mills, says it's around 3 million, maybe less than 3 million. The NRA says it's not less than 3 million, but they won't say, at least their official spokespeople won't say what they think the number is. But it's clearly far lower than it was back, just 5-6 years ago. By millions and millions, or likely more than a million at the very least. So they've already had this detrimental effect, and presumably this only makes it worse from there. And can they even come back? That was one of the member pieces I wrote recently. Regardless of this outcome, it's been so long since this came out, and I think a lot of people, not everyone, obviously, there are defenders of the current leadership, especially inside of the NRA and on the board. But there are a lot of people who are deeply critical of the people who have gotten the NRA into this mess. It's all this very similar makeup now as it was in terms of the most important positions in the NRA as it was back in 2018, 2019. Charles Cotton is the president. He was the head of the audit committee back when they were approving a lot of the transactions at issue in this case. Andrew Ulanundam is the current executive vice president. He replaced Wayne. He was sort of Wayne's right-hand man for decades inside the organization. There hasn't been a lot of internal change to people that run the organization, and all the people, they put together a committee that is supposed to look for the new permanent EVP, and it is filled with people who have been on the NRA board for a very long time, who were in top positions during all of this
all these corruption allegations surfaced. So, yeah, I mean, even if the monitor comes in and replaces everyone, or these people who are there currently resign, or what have you, if they get a wholly new organization, they're probably still going to have a lot of trouble convincing people to come back and to trust them with their donations again.